Oh. Hello, welcome to another episode of Jog Pod. Today we're going to be going through the sort of second side of sustainable ecosystems, where we look into the tropical rainforest biome in a bit more detail, sort of the effects of humans on it and the benefits we get from it, and we'll delve into the polar and tundra regions as well. And again, the same sort of things, what's the difference between them, and what sort of things do humans do there in terms of their activities. So first of all, we're just going to kick off with some adaptations to the rainforest. Okay, so as you can see, we've got sloths, buttress root, drip tips, and lianas and vines. Effectively, what we want you to know is how maybe a plant and an animal is adapted to that particular biome. Okay, so obviously sloths as one particular thing are camouflaged to their rainforest environment. In particular, because they sort of are so slow moving, sort of algae and stuff like that sort of grows on them like moss. So they actually get greener over time. Then they come down, I think, every couple of months, I think, sir. And they come down and have a bath, don't they? So yeah, a little bit like a teenager potentially. Yeah, nice and simple for sloths. I like looking at kill-bill toucans. They've got really thin sort of beaks in terms of their bone. It's made from keratin. So some nice stuff there for you to go away and look and research in terms of animal adaptation. But otherwise, if you listen to the last jog pod, Mr. Hatchell did a great summary of buttress roots, which effectively grow horizontally and allow the tree to be supported as it grows to its great height. Remember, obviously, our emergent trees can grow up to 50 meters plus. And obviously, they want to get as many nutrients as they can from that leaf litter, that topsoil where all the goodness is, okay? Because obviously, as we remember from the last session, all the nutrients end up in biomes, okay? Two other quick ones, drip tips, okay? Basically, sort of do what they say on the tin. They allow sort of water to run off really easy and drip down to the roots. And lianas and vines basically grow onto other plants. They're a bit like a bit like parasites, lianas. I'd compare them to. So they attach themselves and grow on other trees, so they can get to like the areas where more sunlight is. So they're quite lazy. They just grow up other trees and let them do the work to then benefit from the sunlight. Okay. One other quick thing before I let you go over to Mr. Hatchell is we've got some bits about the native or the indigenous people of the rainforest. The one key thing that we talked about before is how they generally live quite sustainably within the rainforest. And this is down to one key thing called shifting cultivation. Okay, the key principle behind this is that once they sort of clear some land, they then farm it. But as you know, once they've farmed it and there's no longer any trees, leaching and the nutrients that were in the soil are going to disappear very quickly. So what they'll do is they'll sometimes burn the wood that's there. So when they burn it and it breaks down, it passes nutrients back on. But what they need to make sure they do is they shift their agriculture or shift their cultivation, for the technical term that we're using, and they move to different areas. They don't constantly keep farming the same area over time, okay? And obviously they're what we call subsistence farmers. So they live off the land, so they get their food through hunting and gathering, and obviously they're very good in terms of making their own sort of resources, sort of their bows and arrows, the homes and boats, to be adapted for the rainforest, for example, being built off the ground typically because of the rainfall. And obviously they know lots about natural medicines as well and what they can use. So that's sort of the sustainable way that rainforest inhabitants can use the area. But on the flip side, we can think on how a bigger scale, those that aren't native use the rainforest and the benefits we get from it, but also the impacts that we have on the rainforest. So Mr. Hatchell, if you'd like to take over the effects of human activity.
I would. So I'm going to start with the benefits of the rainforest. That's on the right-hand side here, okay? So the rainforest benefits the entire world. It provides us with lots of materials that we use every day that you don't even realize sometimes you are using. So there is a list here of the benefits of the rainforest, and they include raw materials, water, food, health, energy, and climate. I'm just going to pick a few of these to go through. So raw materials. Think about the desks you use to write on in school, okay? They are made from wood. Now, it depends on the type of wood, obviously, but some sort of forms of timber come straight from the tropical rainforest, and rubber as well. And therefore, we use those materials all the time, and that's one of the benefits to us of using the rainforest. Food. Important foods such as bananas, pineapples, coffee that we drink, etc., are all grown in tropical rainforest biomes and environments. So we benefit, again, from the product of a tropical rainforest through food. Health. Around 25% of modern medicines are actually sourced from rainforest trees and ingredients. And that's important because as we continue to develop more high-tech healthcare systems, and as we continue to discover new drugs, for example, for cancer, tropical rainforests play an important role in us using those drugs that are naturally produced. And finally, climate is a really important one. So tropical rainforests and rainforests in general are extremely important for climate, because what rainforests and trees do is they act as what's called a carbon sink. And what this is, essentially, as we know, is trees absorb carbon dioxide. And as they absorb it, they store it. And they store around 15% of the world's carbon emissions in total. So when these trees are deforested or cut down, we are essentially releasing carbon emissions into the atmosphere that were otherwise stored. So tropical rainforests are very important to balance the world's climate out and stop climate change and heating climate or global warming. So they're just some of the benefits of the rainforest. Mr. Unite, any questions on any of them?
No, really good. I was just definitely going to pick up that carbon sink and that analogy as well. So no, really good. So I'll keep it nice and quick. So yeah, let's crack on.
Brilliant. So the effect of human activity then. Oops, I've changed slide by accident. The effects of human activity then, on the left-hand side here, these are essentially the impacts that we have on using the rainforest. So we use the rainforest for all these benefits, but what impacts does it have? So first of all, logging. This is essentially the cutting down of trees to harvest timber, for example, to make furniture, to make paper, and so on. This destroys the biodiversity of the tropical rainforest. This removes habitats for animals and plants to be able to live and thrive in the tropical rainforest. This has also led to confrontation and conflict between indigenous tribes, so the people who are naturally born on the land and raised there, versus companies and large companies who log the trees to be able to sell the timber worldwide. So that's the one problem and the one impact of logging that we have on the tropical rainforest. The next one is agriculture. So this is kind of related to shifting cultivation that Sir mentioned earlier excellently, right? What we have as a society happening in tropical rainforests is what's called slash and burn. Now, slash and burn is where we are cutting down large areas of tropical rainforest and burning the landscape, essentially, to be able to extract things such as palm oil that you might find in your shampoo and conditioner. What this does is it obviously increases our carbon emission because we're removing the trees as a sink, but it also leads to soil erosion because that soil is exposed to the sunlight when it was not previously. So the soil starts to lose all of its nutrients. Okay, the nutrient cycle stops working in the way it did before. And we mentioned the nutrient cycle in the last job pod. And the increase in the use of palm oil around the world is directly, therefore, linked to soil infertility and the inability of soil to actually grow more plants. So that's agriculture and its impact on the soil and the tropical rainforest. But there are two others. Mineral extraction, okay, which is where the mouse is now. And this is extracting from underneath the ground precious metals such as gold or iron ore and things like oil, which are found in the rainforest. Now, obviously, mining these leads to a massive benefit for us as a society in the sense that it creates economic wealth, okay? It creates income for people. However, what it does is it means that indigenous people are displaced. They are moved forcibly to other areas. Roads are built to remove the minerals that are being extracted and to transport them. And therefore, there is a spiral of decline in the environmental quality of the tropical rainforest. And finally, mass tourism. Now, this is tourism on a large scale, okay? And essentially what we're talking about here is hotels being built, roads being built, more human activity in the tropical rainforest. And the reason this is a bad thing is because it just leads to a bad relationship between people, the government, and indigenous tribes, and has a really detrimental impact on the flora and fauna, the plants and animals that live in the tropical rainforest. So they are the impacts of human activity on the rainforest, and before that we've done the benefits of the rainforest overall. Ms. Unite, would you like to start the polar regions?
Yeah, of course. Okay, so obviously when we talk about the poles, you know where they are. Okay, we're thinking those sort of extreme north and extreme south. So what we're really talking about is the Arctic and the Antarctic. Okay, just remember there's all this extra cold, so there's two C's in it. Okay, so check your spellings as you're doing your revision notes as you go along. So obviously we want to think about the climate there. Okay, so in terms of the general differences, as we sort of start partly go down a little bit as well. Okay, we obviously want to know what some key differences between the two are. Okay, obviously in general they're very cold. Okay, with temperatures very rarely going above 0 degrees. Okay? As I'm sure you can imagine, when you say the Arctic, Antarctic, you conjure up certain ideas. But the winters can be very, very cold, and down to about minus 40 degrees. And in fact, the Antarctic can go down, I think, to about 80 odd degrees, minus in Celsius as well. Okay.
Yeah, the record there is minus 89 degrees
I
Celsius.
wanted to say that. I thought it was 83.9 or 89.3, but I didn't want to say so. So I knew you'd pick up on it otherwise. Was it Vostok?
Yes, that was it.
Yeah, there we go. There we go. Saved myself there a bit good. So again, we know that generally, when we talk about these comparisons a little bit later as well, is that the Arctic is colder and drier than the Arctic. Okay, so just some things for you to remember as we sort of move on. Is that obviously the Arctic is an ocean, a sea. Okay, so it's surrounded by landmass, places like Greenland, Russia, etc. And therefore at sea, obviously, most of it is frozen in terms of sea ice. Okay, so as you can imagine, you see the polar bears walking on the ice and stuff like that. And that's what we would find if we were to go to the Arctic. What that also means is you can sort of see in the picture that's sort of just above where I'm talking, the sea ice can naturally grow and decline or retreat during a process of a year. So when it's warmer, it might decline in size, but when it cools, it can also increase in size. So some things for you to think about there. Whereas the Antarctic is a bit different. It's not necessarily sea ice. We find what's called ice sheets. So like a sheet lays on your bed, okay, an ice sheet lays over the landmass, because obviously, as we know, Antarctica is one of our 7 continents. Okay, it also has a mountain range, which is pretty important because, as we know, altitude impacts on temperature. So I think it's about every mile. I think it's meant to be about a degree Celsius. Again, so feel free to pick up on that for me. I think something like that.
Yeah.
But then again, obviously, we also find that making the Antarctic that little bit colder as well. Obviously, with the tilt of the Earth, it's also that bit further tilted away, so it's a bit colder in terms of the lower levels of concentration. One thing to remember is obviously if they're white, we have something called the albedo effect. So it basically reflects the sun's rays back into the atmosphere more so than it would do if it was another color. So again, that contributes to that colder temperatures in those areas. As Sir went through last lesson, we talked about flora being like butter, so the butter that's made from plants. So some key things that you're going to find out here, as obviously in the Arctic, we have very few plants. We have what are called lichens, mosses, and grasses. Okay. In particular, we find more in what's called the tundra. And obviously, the tundra is slightly different to the Arctic as we know in terms of the very far north. Okay, so you can also find out another one. It's called a bearberry plant, which is pretty cool. So there's loads of stuff because I know loads of examples have started looking at that. So if you're looking for some plant adaptation, things like lichens and mosses, I think there's the Arctic cotton or something like that as well, sir. So we can have a look at that. So we can have a little look there as well. Obviously, with the Antarctic, okay, generally we're not going to find any land species, okay, because effectively it's all marine based. Obviously, we've got our penguins there as well, okay, and they dive in. There's plenty of whales, narwhals, and stuff like that, okay, but there's not really any land animals. And just remember, you get polar bears in the Arctic, and you get the penguins in the south. So, do you want me to do a bad joke here?
Go on.
Why can't polar bears eat penguins?
Oh, you're gonna have to tell me.
They can't get the wrapper off, sir.
Oh, for God's sake.
There we go. Right, they've listened to me long enough. They've had a joke now. That concludes a very basic summary of the Arctic and Antarctica. Obviously, you want to know some key differences between them in terms of their location, their climate, and flora and fauna. Right, sir, back to you.
Brilliant. So I'm going to look at briefly here just climate change and how climate change is impacting the polar regions. So the really basic thing to remember, ladies and gents, is very simply that climate change is having a detrimental impact on both the Arctic and Antarctic. Okay. And the reason for that is because as temperatures in the atmosphere warm, that also warms ocean surface temperatures. And if sea surface temperatures are warming, that means the ice in the Arctic and Antarctic is melting or thawing, along with the permafrost thawing. And therefore, not only is that releasing emissions that are stored in that ice from millions of years ago, but it's also creating rising sea levels for the rest of the world. So the key thing to remember is, as climate change happens, we're warming temperatures, that's melting ice, it's releasing emissions, and that's having a further spiral of decline on not only the world, but specifically the Arctic and Antarctic areas too. In terms of the actual landscape or the profile of the soil in the Arctic, all right, the key thing to remember is that most of the Arctic and tundra is layered with what's called permafrost. Okay, now permafrost means that it's literally permanently frozen, okay, all year round. And that is just underneath what's called an active layer. Now, the active layer is a very top surface layer, like in tropical rainforests with the humus, right? And this layer is frozen in winter, but it thaws in summer. Okay, and what that allows it to do is it grows some very specific species of plants, although these are very small and they don't really blossom like they do in the tropical rainforest. And then deep down under both the active layer and permafrost, we have bedrock. And bedrock is what it says on the tin, really. It's rock at the very bottom, the bed of the soil. And this doesn't really release many nutrients because the low temperature weathers it very slowly. Okay, so we don't really get many nutrients in Arctic soil either, and that is why we don't get many different species of plants growing there. So, make sense?
Yeah, nice, simple. Definitely agree about that bedrock. It does say exactly what's on the tin, doesn't it? Not much to say about bedrock.
Exactly. So, like we did with tropical rainforest, let's look at the effects of what we do on polar regions. So what is it we do in polar regions and how does that impact them? So first of all, oil and gas exploration. The Arctic holds lots of untapped oil and gas that we haven't really explored or extracted. However, in some areas, we have done this. We have actually extracted some of the oil and gas deep under the ocean. And there have been impacts such as the Exxon Valdez oil spill of 1989, a really famous example. You can Google it and have a look at it. And that threatened the ecosystem dramatically. Cleanup operations were and still are slow. There are still impacts ongoing from this and very costly. So our exploration for more fossil fuels actually creates dramatic impacts on polar environments. Another one, whaling. So this is basically hunting for whales. Whales are very expensive on the market. They're very valuable. And what this did was, as more and more hunting for whales happened, it led to declines in the whale populations as a whole because it wasn't being managed effectively. And therefore, what we had was a dying out of that species. Now, luckily, a lot of countries today have banned whaling, but there are still a few countries that do carry out this practice. So we need to make sure that there is international regulations in line so that we are not just killing the whale population off, because that will be detrimental for the whale species overall. In terms of fishing.
Sorry, sir, just pause you there. That was a really good summary. Well done.
Oh, really good. Oh, yeah, I get that. Yeah. Did you hear my laugh there, sir?
I did, yeah. No, that was really. No, I did thought you'd appreciate it. Anyway, so I'll let you carry on. That was good. But yeah, fishing now. I'll try and think of a pun.
Brilliant. So fishing, essentially, the cold waters of the Arctic and Antarctic actually have really good stocks of fish. And they, again, are largely untouched because we didn't have the technology for years and years to be able to fish in these areas. However, today we do. And these polar areas are very difficult to police and difficult to monitor because of the harsh conditions that you find in the seas of these areas. So there has been a dramatic decrease in the stocks of fish there are. In other words, there's a dramatic decrease in the amount of fish that are in these colder waters. And that's really, really detrimental and really damaging again for the fish stocks and therefore the ecosystem as a whole. And
That's
finally,
a good example of interdependence there, sir. Sorry to get in, but from what you did last season, is that a good example of interdependence and that trophic cascade that we talked about for food webs and food chains?
yeah, absolutely. So what you'll find is that a lot of the indigenous communities of the Arctic, for example, rely on fishing, but it's small scale fishing for them. So it doesn't have a detrimental massive impact. But what's happened is we rely on the fish in our fish and chip shops, for example, in the UK from these areas. And therefore, the fish are relying on us to be sustainable, but it's not exactly happening. And we fish for those products for our own personal economic and social gain. In terms of tourism, finally, more and more tourism is taking place in the polar regions, okay? So, for example, cruises are steadily growing in popularity. Travel by tourists simply increase emissions. And if we're increasing emissions, we are increasing climate change over time. And also wildlife, who live in a natural ecosystem that generally has been untouched for thousands of years, suddenly are being disrupted by tourists getting up close and interacting with their environment. So we are also changing the course of the way in which the plants and animals live in the Arctic regions. Sir, any questions on any of that?
No, really good, sir. I found that really good quick summary. Obviously, one thing I can remember was in that whaling bit we looked at. I think it was along the Clyde River in Canada, where the Inuit were allowed to do it as a sustainable method. So you sort of did touch on that with the fishing, but yeah, no, I just remember seeing that particular thing before there. So no, really good. So what do we do that in terms of case studies? In so for those two areas, obviously, if we cause impacts, there must be a way that we try to, mitigate or reduce the impacts that we are having on these areas.
Yes. So I'm going to go back now to our rainforests, okay? Because our case study for our tropical rainforest and sustainably managing the tropical rainforest in Costa Rica is the Samosati Nature Reserve. Now, I'm going to do a plug here and I'm going to stop for a second because we have made, as a geography department, a whole jog pod on all of the case studies from the entire course between year 9 to year 11. So if you really want a very detailed summary of any of the case studies in any of the topics, please on YouTube go to the case study presentation or jog pod and you will find that. But here I'm just going to spend literally 90 seconds going through the main points from each of the case studies. And so
I'll time you.
Let's
go. I'll
Let's
time
go.
you. 90 seconds. Let's go.
So this one, the Samosati Nature Retreat, as I said, it's how we sustainably manage Costa Rica. And essentially, we do it through ecotourism. And that is tourism that is not mass tourism. It's friendlier to the environment. It has conservation in mind. And Samosati, therefore, is popular within this. The advantages of it are essentially that local people are only employed. So the hotel staff, the guides, the farmers, the transport are all locally employed. And they use locally sourced food and produce in those hotels. The disadvantages, though, are that land prices have increased in the Costa Rican rainforest area because of this use of the rainforest and because of the use of the land. And it's expensive to build these very sustainably whilst only being small scale. So there are advantages and disadvantages to this sustainable management technique. Just on a side note, the threats to the actual rainforest themselves are things like agriculture, we mentioned earlier, farming in terms of cattle, so farming in terms of animals, extracting gold and metal and other mining, etc. So, and also, of course, deforestation as a result of all of those. And finally, just in general in Costa Rica, general rainforest management has included things like creating national parks, 28 of them. All right, 24% of the country's land is protected from building on. Agroforestry. That agroforestry is all about growing more trees and crops together to create better farming conditions. So trying to grow them side by side. And afforestation has been a policy of the Costa Rican government to try and grow more trees by replanting them and replacing trees that have been lost. So how am I doing for time?
150. So very good, sir. Very good. I'll give you that. No worries.
Excellent. Now, finally then, your polar environment case studies, all right? What we've got in the Arctic are two different case studies, and it's really important to highlight the differences. So, the Ice Hotel in northern Sweden is an example of a small-scale sustainable management technique. And what this means is it's local, it's not national, it's not done by lots of different countries, it's just in a place in northern Sweden. Whereas we've also got another case study for your polar environments, and that is, as you can see, the Arctic Council. And this is a global scale strategy. So this is 8 different countries together forming the Arctic Council to try and manage the Arctic. So I'm going to start with the Ice Hotel. Essentially, this is a hotel built from ice, and the ice comes from the River Torn, which is the local river. And the water is extracted from that river to create the ice. It caters from a small number of guests, and everything in the hotel essentially is made from ice. Things you can do there is a dining room in the hotel, there is electricity supply, there is transport. So it's easily accessible to anyone, and tourists can enjoy activities like ski tours, wildlife viewings, and meeting the local Sami community, which is the indigenous population there. And the ways in which it is sustainable management are as follows. The Ice Hotel has strict guidelines on how tourists should behave and how they respect the local environment. They use solar panels most of the year to actually produce their own energy and therefore to reduce carbon emissions. However, in the winter months, when it's dark nearly all day, they don't use these solar panels because they can't, because there's not enough sunlight to generate the electricity. So therefore, there is some downsides, such as they do have to use fossil fuels 3 or 4 months of the year to produce energy. But another good thing about the Ice Hotel is that all of the waste is carefully contained and removed. So they think environmentally friendly in terms of their waste as well. Mr. Unite, we're on to the Arctic Council now. Are you ready?
Yeah, well, I reckon we do this one super quick, sir. I mean, I say we, you.
Right, so this is our global...
You're in the zone, sir. I'll let you crack on.
I am. This is our global scale management strategy, okay? So this is 8 countries in 1996 forming what is essentially a focus of environmental protection and trying to get it into international law, although that has not happened yet, for protecting the Arctic. So what does the Arctic aim to do? It aims to reduce the impact of climate change and environmental change. It aims to reduce and control shipping and mineral extraction where it can. It, however, has no legal powers to actually stop other countries doing anything in the Arctic. So whilst it is really good as a basic principle to follow, and whilst it releases good ideas on how to respect and protect the Arctic, the problem with it is it does not have any legal powers. It cannot make legally binding law. Now, in 2015, we had the Paris Accord or the Paris Agreement worldwide. And this was 196 countries worldwide who all managed to agree to limit global warming to 2 degrees Celsius or less of 1990 levels. Now, this is a treaty or a law that's really good for helping to protect the Arctic. So the Arctic Council has promoted this, adopted this, and basically says to all world countries, we support this policy, please follow it. That helps to protect the Arctic. And what you need to think about essentially for the Arctic Council as a global scale sustainable management technique is, has it been successful? What are the drawbacks? What are the successes of it? Essentially, the Arctic Council is too new to really say whether it's been successful in the long term. As we said before, 1996 is when it was created. Okay, so it's only 24 years old, really. However, things like the USA withdrawing from the Paris Agreement in this year, 2020, means that we could see potentially more damage to the Arctic as a result of them not being part of that agreement. So therefore, the Arctic Council's role in trying to enforce the Paris Agreement is they're finding it more tough. Now, the USA could rejoin within the next couple of years or less, and therefore that would help the Arctic Council in enforcing the rules. The Arctic sea floor as well, the Arctic territory as such, is claimed by lots of different countries, okay? Countries are trying to claim different areas of the Arctic. And this further creates problems for trying to enforce rules in the Arctic and trying to therefore sustainably manage it overall. Mr. Unite, have I missed anything and have you got any questions?
No, I thought that was really nice and clear, sir. You know, essentially, you know, to come back to that, has it been successful or not? Definitely that fact that it's still new, and obviously the Paris Agreement in particular really good in terms of that point. But yeah, no, otherwise it does carry out those studies. But you know, how much, you know, can it really do if they don't have those legal powers, as you said? So no, just a really good one, just to really make sure. You know, I had my year 11s today, and they could really go back to there was a small and a global scale for that as well. So yeah, nice and good for that particular section there, sir. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Well, what we'll do then is we'll leave you with this jog pod. Hopefully it was useful to you. Please do make sure you go back and look at all of our other resources and materials on the YouTube channel. We are slowly uploading them as we go. Please do ask your teacher if you've got any questions about anything, and good luck with your revision and carry on with it. We will see you in the next one. Thank you, sir.
No worries. Thank you, sir.